Hi there, sorry I haven't been posting much lately, but it's been super busy. I've been on tour, I've been making a couple of different records, a lot going on, but I've got a little bit of downtime, so I thought I'd come in here and talk about how to approach preparing yourself for a gig. Now this doesn't matter whether it's a wedding gig or you're going to go on tour with someone, any level. If you're doing a new gig, you have to put your sounds together, you've got to learn all the material. So I thought I'd go through my process of doing that. I think number one is, it doesn't matter whether it's a small gig or a massive tour, you've got to put in the work, you've got to learn the material properly. Anything else is just disrespectful to anyone else turning up for that gig. It's something that used to annoy the hell out of me when I used to do a lot of wedding gigs back in the day. I'd be the one that would learn all the stuff and people would turn up and they just wouldn't know it, and it'd just be such a drag getting through the tunes, not doing them properly. You have to learn not just the chords, you've got to learn the identifiable parts. Every tune's got certain parts that are important. And it's a matter of, I think, when you're looking at doing a gig, which parts shall I play? Say you're doing a tune like Good Times by Chic, you know, a wedding classic, you have to have that piano part down. That's the identifiable part for the keyboards. If you just turn up and you just learn the chord, well, I learned the chords, you know. You know, you're not replicating the song properly. You know, people want to hear those identifiable parts. So the first key to each track is, okay, which are the important bits? Listen to it, try to replicate them. The second thing is, try to replicate the sounds as well. Get them as close as you can. A lot of keyboard players, that they're really good players, but they'll just go through the whole gig playing the Rhodes, you know, regardless of what the tunes are. It's just a bit like, you're really only doing half the job. So when I do a gig, I spend a lot of time trying to get the sounds. I'll give you an example here how I'll do it. I'm just using one keyboard. This is the Montage M. It's admittedly a big heavy keyboard. You might want to do the Mod X, be much lighter or whatever. But if you have a big keyboard like this, you can split it loads. You know, you're not stuck to one sound. So for instance here, I've got a piano sound. And what I've done here, I've layered it up. On the Yamaha, I can add these elements. So I've added some strings, right? But the volume's turned down on them. And when I use the expression pedal here, I can bring in the strings. And I've also split this keyboard so the piano ends, I think, here. And up here, I've got strings. And what I've done, I've turned off the sustain receive information for these strings. And what I've also done is I've split it so that, as well as the piano and the strings, you've also got some string hits up here. So now you see you're covering a hell of a lot of ground there by being clever with splits. This one's one of my own tunes that I do live, and the record has a really beautiful vocal part sung by my wife, and we can't really cover it in the same lush way live. So what we do is I trigger the sample of the record, the drummer's playing to a click, so the tempo is the same, and we sing on top of it. So it just fattens out the sound. Sometimes you have to do that, you know, you need the original sound from the record to make it authentic enough live, you know. So in this case, I've got this. Right, it goes into different keys. And I've got a chord sampled with it, and then the rest of the phrase is on this note. So you can hear that's just the chord and the bell because the vocal doesn't sing over there. So the two together go. And then up here I've got a Rhodes. So the two together then, I'll sing live over the top of this and the girls sing with me. But we've got this beautiful bed. And then on the Yamaha, you've got these scenes, so you can bring in some different sounds on another scene. I'm sure each keyboard product will have its own sort of version of this, but here, if I press number 2, I get strings, like a Selena. And I've also programmed them so that when I use the expression pedal, it brings up a phaser in these strings. So that's quite cool, quite flexible. So I can bring them in when I want it to get bigger. We've got some like other little vibey ambient sounds here. So if you have access to samples, you know, if you're doing original music, you can maybe get the band samples and put them in, key them on a note. That's what I do. I'll find a note that's out of the way and I'll trigger them like that. And it really does make a big difference. Sometimes you can't recreate sounds perfectly. You know, there's some amazingly produced sounds. It's very hard to just replicate on a keyboard. The drummer has to be playing with a click. That's the only thing. You know, if the tempo is always the same, then you can do that. You can also cut them up into segments. You can divide it so that your error makes less of a difference. So, for instance, if there was a string line, but it's like ba-da 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 ba bum 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 ba-da, you know, it means you have to really be so accurate on the one, otherwise it's going to be really obvious, you know, it's going to drift out. So what I do in those situations is I'll cut the sample up into ba-da 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 whatever, and then I'll have to remember where that is on the keyboard, and then I can trigger it. 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, so these are the little tricks. You can cut these samples up into manageable segments. Then if your timing is slightly off, it's not going to have a big impact. You know, even if you screw it up, it's only a momentary sort of glitch. Here's another one of my songs that I did recently for a show, and I've got here a Rhodes. There's a Rhodes on the original, but I wanted to fill it out a bit more, so I've layered it slightly. So what that consists of, if I show you the elements, is a pad, a very simple pad. I've got it going left and right and detuned to make it nice and broad. And that goes with the Rhodes, which is, if I play it on its own, I've programmed it to have a delayed vibrato come in. It's not something you'd normally have on a Rhodes, of course, but it just seemed to suit this particular tune. And I've timed the way the LFO comes in to come in at the right time for the tempo of the song. Those are things to think about as well. If you're putting LFO and stuff on sounds, the timing of the track affects how fast and how quickly the LFO comes in. Makes a big difference. You know, think about that. If you're a singer and you sing, then you employ vibrato at a certain point in the note and it's effective, you know, certain timing. So you can apply that to synth sounds as well. You get the certain timing where the vibrato comes in. Anyway, it makes a nice kind of big layer. And on the top, I've got a top line on this tune, and I couldn't quite get the sound out of one instrument. This is like a virtual analog sound that I programmed. I just felt like it needed a bit more sparkle, so I've put a bell with it. So sometimes it's good to layer sounds, you know, just to bring out the frequencies, especially if you're doing a gig, not necessarily a great sounding PA. You know, you need to make sure you've got the right frequencies on your sounds. So See, that pings out. Again, I'm not having the sustain affect this top sound, so I'm free to... And I've also got down here below, I've got a clav. So when I want to swap to a different section, I can bring it in. So I've got 3 parts I can play there. It's important to note as well, normally when you've got presets, there's always way too much reverb on them. It doesn't matter which brand, they always come with too much reverb. And if you're doing a gig, especially a gig with not necessarily a great sound system, like a wedding situation, you don't want a load of reverb on it because it's just going to become really mushy. No one's going to hear that lovely shimmery quality of the reverb. They're just going to hear a big old mush. So if you're going to use presets and then you're trying to organize your tunes, think about that. Try to have very minimal reverb, I would have advised. Just a tiny little bit, you know, to make you feel comfortable. And then the odd sound you might put more on. For instance, here, the Rose is pretty dry. There's just a little hint of reverb. There's a bit more on the clav because it's the sort of thing that needs to smooth over a little bit. Now, the other thing that's worth talking about is levels. First of all, obviously within a song, you have to think about the balance of the levels. You know, the piano part maybe won't be as loud as some featured sound that's playing a particular important riff on a tune. So obviously balance within each song. But what I do on larger gigs, when you've got your own sound engineer, maybe your own monitor engineer, and it's hopefully the same every night, then I set my levels for the whole show. I try to get in rehearsals, I get it to a point where I never have to touch the master volume button. In fact, what I do is I set it to maximum on all my synths and all my keyboards so that I can't adjust it. It's just on maximum. And the sound engineer will really love you for that, you know, because it's a real pain for them when things are going up and down like nobody's business. And also for the other musicians, because if you're all using in-ears, then it's really annoying if suddenly the guitar is twice the volume, you know, on a certain tune. It almost means you can't have guitar in your in-ears because you can't trust that it's going to stay at a particular volume. So when you're at a pro level, it's really important to keep your levels absolutely consistent. They don't change. You don't do the creepy thing of like, oh, I'm just going to turn it up because I want everyone to hear me better. You know, don't do that. Set your level, leave it, and that's it. And you have to trust the sound people to manage the levels in between the instruments. Don't let your ego get in the way and suddenly you crank it up double what it was in the sound check, drive everyone nuts. So you're setting your levels between all the patches, all the songs, and then like on this Yamaha, you've got a live set. I'd get all my tunes together. If you know what the set order is, obviously you can just put them in order, no confusion, label them so you know the names of each song. I'll always have at the bottom of the list, easily available, a few essential sounds. They'd be, for me, like a Rhodes type sound. Just one that I can turn to anytime, you know. For instance, sometimes in the gig, someone might surprise you and point to you and go, play a solo, and you didn't expect it. You don't want to be going, oh, you know, like that. You want to instantly, okay, kick in a Rhodes. Off you go, no worries, you know, and you've set the levels to be equal or roughly just slightly above the rest of your set. I normally have a couple of different leads, you know, something you're really familiar with, because part of playing a good solo as well is really knowing the sound, you know, so I'll always put some interactive stuff in so that it keeps it interesting. So like I've got this sound. I've got it, so Aftertouch is going to give me some LFO. And Expression's going to bring in maybe reverb, delay or whatever it is. having those interactions is a great idea because it can make what's basically, I'm just doing a bit of noodling, you know, in a pentatonic kind of vibe. How much of that can you listen to? That's why you have to kind of bring in some other things that will make it more interesting. You can either bring in harmonic things, but if you're doing pop music, you don't want to get all jazzy on it. So then you can bring in things like reverbs and other effects. You know, so you might have something like that. You might have a less abrasive lead. And, you know, I would always have a clav. Always great to have a clav, you know, if you're in a funk band or a dance type band of any kind. So I'll always have my bespoke one. I'll always have a wah on it because it just makes it sound a lot more realistic. So you need to get under the hood and program that in. You know, you just connect it to your expression pedal. So I'll always have that. And then I guess maybe an organ patch is great as well. See, listen to that. There's too much reverb because it's a preset. So just go in, get rid of most of the reverb. Just a little hint like that is fine. And then obviously a nice piano. I like to have a bright one like that. Again, too much reverb. So take the reverb down. So you got one piano that you can easily turn to, and I like to have that plus maybe a mellow one. You know, if you're doing a more mellow thing. So I'll have a couple of pianos, maybe even, I love the felt piano on this Yamaha. So if you're doing like a ballad, you know, in a harsh sounding room, this can be a bit of a lifesaver. It's like, oh, finally, there's a nice warm sound. The main thing to say as well with these gigs is like, don't take on the gig if you're not willing to do the time, you know. You've got to put in the time to get the sounds together, learn the material inside out, preferably without any music or iPad, but I guess it's perfectly acceptable to have an iPad or something there to remind yourself. But if it's a bigger gig, I always try to commit it to memory because I just think it looks a bit crap having an iPad there, personally. But yeah, I get it. If it's a wedding gig or something, you're just doing a few, iPad is fine. So there you have it. You know, learn the parts properly, get the sounds down 100%. If there's samples to be had, get them, put them on the keyboard and trigger them. Make sure you got the tempos right for delays, LFOs. Get all the levels consistent, as consistent as you possibly can. Turn up on time. Don't be... All right, I hope that helped. See you soon.